Are you trying to establish your brand as a thought leader? Start a podcast, invite industry experts to be guests on your show, and watch your brand become the prime resource for decision makers in your industry. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Dan Murdoch. He is the head of global marketing at Harri. Dan, how you doing today, man?
Logan, I'm awesome. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, really appreciate you coming on. There were a lot of folks who got a ton of value in your last appearance on the show back in episode 831, when you were talking about a 3-part formula to ditch traditional lead scoring. I love some of the things you were talking about there. And I know a lot of people who engage with the podcast listening and on LinkedIn got a lot of value. So more than happy to have you on and talk about this idea of sales development, reporting up to marketing. For folks who didn't get a chance to catch your last appearance on the show, man, tell them a little bit about you and what you and the team at Harri are up to.
Absolutely. So as you said, right, Dan Murdoch, head of global marketing for Harri. We are a software technology platform that's helping hospitality businesses build, manage, and engage their teams. And effectively what that means is that we have a platform that's helping them with talent acquisition, employer branding, applicant tracking, scheduling, time attendance, kind of goes on. And I won't belabor the point. But effectively, we're allowing them to have the human capital management and workforce operating suite and technology to help them do all those things to manage their biggest challenge, which is their people. So super excited, been here for a year now, and not only getting into marketing, but also overseeing business development and sales development on a global scale.
Yeah, awesome, man. You know, that is an industry that definitely requires a lot when it comes to people management. So I'm sure you guys have your hands full and you're doing some great things for folks in that sector. And you touched a little bit about your current role. And I think it's worth for listeners backing up a little bit as we dive into, why you're passionate and how you think this can work with sales development, reporting up into marketing. Tell us a little bit more about your background, because you have experience on both sides of the fence, if you will, in both sales development and marketing, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think I like to think of it as being a double major, right? Which is having had the very deep institutional experience in marketing, modern marketing, I'll call it that. And then on the other side of that coin is having, led and managed sales development organizations, both domestically and abroad. And honestly, the like most startups, right? You come in, you work really hard, try to climb the ladder as quickly as possible. And in my very first organization, I'd been there for about 2.5 years, and they said, "Hey, we want to start a global sales development organization. We know you're the marketing guy, but we think you have the chops to go make this happen. So go do it, right? Throw me right in the deep end." And keep in mind, I had no sales experience. I had no understanding of what sales development was up until that point. But I was like, okay, challenge accepted, right? I want to go grab this. And so that's what I did. And so like any student or good student or somebody who pursues information to get better at something, I just threw myself into every bit of content that existed online at that time, which is like 2014, both online and in print. And I was inspired by 2 particular resources. One, InsideSales.com, and they're a sales acceleration technology platform that helps sales development teams better organize themselves in sales velocity and execution. And they had tons of stuff for me to learn and to grow from. And then I also read the Sales Acceleration Formula book, which is basically an adaptation of how HubSpot facilitated the first $100 million in revenue through sales acceleration in marketing and sales development. And the light bulbs went off for me in so many different ways because, sort of coming up as a modern marketer, I understood the importance of operational integrity, and also leading with this art and science, methodology in both marketing and sales development. So it spoke really, to me as a person and in sort of my skill sets. And I realized that there was the harmonization opportunity for revenue ops in sales development and marketing. And then from there, right, I kind of built the team. I was in the US, UK, and in Singapore and Australia. And I've now, led, sort of in parallel marketing and sales development at my last 3 organizations, so at scale.
Yeah. So obviously that lends itself to, you being the guy who can speak to this with a little bit of experience. Having done that at multiple organizations, I can attest to, both of those being great resources. We just recently had Dave Elkington, founder of InsideSales.com, on the show. They're always putting out great content for the sales development space. I've read the Sales Acceleration Formula. That greatly helped me get my arms around how I see the future of building the sales team for our agency. So I think you were consuming the right resources at the time, and you've had experiences that inform your thoughts on this topic. So from there, let's dive in. You touched on the art and the science. Tell us a little bit about where you see the role of data coming into play to this idea of why sales development should report into marketing.
Yeah, totally. And I think that it's really underlying to how do you solve the biggest problem in a sales development rep's day to day? Who am I calling, how and when and with what, right? I think more often than not, when I've walked in or inherited a situation right within sales development, it's always been just an operational mishmash. We're just smiling and dialing, we're spraying and praying. And there isn't a purpose there, nor do they really understand the underlying opportunity inside of whatever CRM they're using or the engagement tool like a SalesLoft or InsideSales.com, and who to get in front of, when and where and with what. And so I've always been a proponent of marketing needs to be leading in the context of the go-to-market, right? And putting the wind in the sails of the sales team, if you will, with the type of content you're launching or whatever it might be to help people get their foot in the door, right? In order to create consultative selling, and not to be the guy of trying to win on we're the best, but trying to actually attach to heartstrings and actually attach to real pain, right? Which is what ultimately creates compelling events to get sales done, at least in the context of an enterprise SaaS company. I knew that I was the best person internally amongst the rest of my marketing team to best enable a sales development rep to go down a particular path of data, of people, right, that have engaged with our brand, that have, maybe, downloaded a certain piece of content or whatever, the fundamentals, right, if you will, of engagement, to say, you should call this person and here's how you should do so, right? And I think that was a huge eye-opening moment for me to say, marketing is as long as you have strong operations and insight into how, people are engaging with your brand on an online or digital basis, or whatever the channels might be, to help them prioritize their time, right? Time is money. At the end of the day, right? Activity correlated to appointment setting or demo requests or whatever you are measuring your sales development team on from a goal perspective, you need to give them the best chance out of every 100 calls to be able to book an appointment. And that's sort of the headline that I've always felt that marketing was best positioned to help sales development do.
I completely agree with you there. I think a lot of folks get that commonality that you're speaking to of marketing pushing the wind in the sails with enablement content and those sorts of things. But when we really think about the data, that can be an even stronger wind to push them in the right direction, right?
Exactly. And I think the other side of that is in the context of how do we prioritize what content's getting built, like what's working and what's not working, right? If we're building, I've seen this happen so many times, right? Marketing team pulls out an initiative around a strategy, around a piece of content that is I'll call it 10 degrees of separation from the actual vein, right? The pain, which is where we're trying to correlate, a particular piece of content or thought leadership piece to what our product can deliver. And I think the mistake that is more commonly happening inside of our industry is I see marketing teams creating content that's 10 degrees of separation away from that pain, right? And not focusing very critically on building content from that vein up, right? If that makes sense. They're working top down instead of bottom up on that. And they're not receiving the feedback necessary to say, hey, this webinar, right, which was, and I'll just use a very quick example, right? We recently did a panel about the rise in minimum wage here in New York City, right? That we shot live and we distribute it out to the market. And our platform helps you optimize labor cost, right? Because the wage pressures that are associated with, the rise in minimum wage in a margin tight business like a restaurant or like a hotel, it's imperative now for them to make sure they have technology that's empower them to better analyze their labor costs. So boom, right? There is a very clear line in a conversation, right? Consultative conversation between that piece of content and them being able to, take a next step with somebody to demo the product, as opposed to, talking about some type of legislative element, right? That is like, again, 10 degrees of separation, right? Away from the actual pain. And I see it happen more often than not. So I guess to put the pin on that is, if marketing is overseeing this entire ecosystem at the top of the funnel between marketing and sales development, you're incentivized directly, right? Because you own the success of that team to create content that works.
Mm-hmm. And I think part of that too is SDRs are having at scale the largest number of conversations with your future customers, with your prospects, right? Or at least hopefully they are, right? So
Exactly.
that feedback loop just makes sense. We're having conversations on the front lines with decision makers who can buy our product or service. Therefore, that feedback loop makes sense to be talking to marketing, who's creating the content to enable better conversations as you go along. So that makes a ton of sense to me. The other thing I think that is important to touch on that you and I talked about a little bit offline, Dan, is how alignment can be better driven when sales development reports into marketing. And sales and marketing alignment, sales development and marketing alignment are, the buzzword of buzzwords these days in B2B. But I think it's worth pausing here and talk tactically about the organic synergy that can happen with this setup, especially because you've seen it in multiple organizations, not just anecdotally.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you put it perfectly, which is it becomes an organic way of life if they actually report right into the structure that we just talked about in marketing. And the other side, like just going back to your point around, over the overarching theme of what does marketing and sales synergy look like, and how are all the strategies, and how many meetings do you hold per week, and who you're talking like you can throw all of that out the window when you actually have to own the result, and you have to sit there and you have to look at the data and you have to coach the reps. And yes, this is a very intensive, laborious process for somebody in leadership to do, and certainly need to have, again, the double major experience in order to make this successful, but it's not something people can't learn. Right. And I think the other part of that, I talk about like feedback loops, et cetera. Like I'm put in a position where I need to look at the data of my reps' productivity every day and every week. If I know that we created a particular piece of content that they are now prioritizing, and I see a lift right in their productivity and ultimately the end result, right, of booking meetings, qualified appointments, whatever it might be, I know that we're doing something right, so we should go do more of it, right? It also helps me better inform how we should be allocating, the variable budget from a marketing perspective. So it's not only about budget, it's about the content, it's about it's real time. I don't have to wait till Friday at 4 p.m. on a Monday to learn that that's working, right? So we become so much more agile and effective in driving what works in real time because I'm right there. And I think it also, the physical nature of it, right? The SDR team sits right next to the marketing team, right? As one cohesive unit. And so it's just pop your head up, and we have an open concept here at Harri, and I've had open concepts, I think, at all my organizations. But it's like that physical aspect of being able to learn in real time. I can hear somebody on the phone. I can, the technology allows me to listen in, but if they were remote or something else, but there's the combination of all those things that creates so much tremendous value in real time, as opposed to we talked about degrees of separation or just like friction in that process. And even I've seen tactics around building SLAs and like doing all of these things and like coming to an agreement of when a rep is going to reach out to a particular type of lead and times, and it's like you're creating too much like friction that doesn't need to be there, right? It's like it almost becomes you're organically creating or manifesting something that doesn't actually need to exist if someone who owns both ends of that spectrum.
Yeah.
Right?
This might be way off topic, and I don't know how many of our listeners are fans of The Big Bang Theory, or if you are, Dan, but it makes me think of the character Sheldon there, who creates a roommate agreement, a relationship agreement.
Yeah.
He even creates a relationship agreement with his his wife. And it illustrates the funny nature of what you're talking about here is if we just create it organically, we don't need these things that are maybe a little bit more forced and don't happen as naturally as much as we think on paper they're going to have the impact that they're going to have. And you make a lot of great points here, tracking the performance of content, being able to adjust and allocate budget, being more agile as a marketing team. But I want to take a little bit of time to play devil's advocate or speak to the other side. I'm sure you've heard, as you're passionate about this structure and the reasoning behind this idea, you've heard counter arguments and things on the other side. So what are some of the things that you hear and what are some of your thoughts on those?
Yeah, totally. And I think the first thing that comes to mind is you're creating confusion in the career development of a sales development rep when you do that, right? Right, because the natural progression or the one of the great benefits of having a sales development organization is that it's meant to be your farm system, right? To move up the ranks, either in your AE organization or in CS, customer success, or other parts of the business, right? And I think it's just as simple as having a conversation to say, listen, this is your career path, and having sort of yourself sit side by side with whoever the sales leader is to say, like, hey, if you are hitting these particular goals or these particular milestones, we're going to have to be in a position to try to put you in an AE role or to become a seller or to go into CS or whatever your intangibles or your skill sets are yielding that are your strengths, right? So it's about just having a conversation and being completely transparent with the rep, right? From the jump, from day zero, or even negative, right, during the candidate experience process when we're going to hire somebody, that this is the trajectory. Here are the proof points. Here are some of the reps who have actually gone through this process and where they are today, and what has made them really successful in doing so. And I've had reps that we've had them on for 6 or 8 months and saying, like, listen, like, I think I'm pretty good at this, but my heart's not in it. And I think I want to go into marketing. Like, perfect. I've now created a farm system for myself.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go is it doesn't eliminate the farm system, but it almost gives you a better farm system. And especially if you set the stage early, when SDRs come on, say, look, you could go into customer success from here. You could go into marketing. You could go into sales. We want to figure out where your strengths are. And it almost positions you better as an organization to create more opportunities for your incoming folks. And, as we talked about in the industry, you guys serve at Harri in lots of different industries. A big challenge for growing organizations is to retain top talent. And I'm a big believer that you need to provide people with multiple pathways and a clear expectation on how to get there. I know Justin Hyatt from Workfront, who leads sales development there, on a previous episode spoke, over and over again on this point of making the career path clear for your sales development team. But that doesn't mean that it has to be a clear single path. You can give them clear paths in multiple directions, is what I hear you saying, Dan.
Exactly right. And I think, first off, the precedent of having that is a cultural win for our employer brand. But also on the other side of that, like, not everyone's going to be a great salesperson, right? This is a high turnover, this is a high attrition role, just across the entire industry, no matter what geography you're in, whatever, right? So being able to find, if you find smart, hungry people that maybe aren't great at sales, you can put them somewhere else. So I completely echo your point.
I love that. Any other thoughts you want to leave listeners with today, Dan, on this idea, this structure, anything that they could go and do or resource to check out that helped you along your journey? You mentioned 2 great ones already. Anything else you want to leave listeners with, man?
Yeah, I think just going back to the previous question, what's the other points of contention I hear? Like, why is the marketing guy leading sales? Right? He's never sold in his life. Like, what business does he have, swimming in these waters? Well, I'll tell you this, right? Given the fact that I was sort of early in my career and, like, again, becoming being a natural student into wanting to learn and grow and adopt a new discipline, I also did a sabbatical in enterprise sales for 3 months. And I did that to force the function of living a day in the life and being able to create empathy and an understanding of what it actually takes to be successful both in sales development and in the AE world. So, I think that's a unique part of my experience that I recognize was a gap, right? When I was given that sort of point of contention, I said, you know what, fair point, challenge accepted. Yeah. And I think that was a wonderful experience for me, right? And, at the end of the day, right, in order for somebody to have the true perspective of someone else's role, you kind of have to live a day in the life. And that's for marketing, that's for sales, that's become multilingual, right, amongst all organizations. That's a skill set that everyone should experience, right, to best understand how to put people in a successful position, regardless of where you are. Mm-hmm. So, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I've heard Gary Vee echo that. Even on this podcast, one of the things I took from his one of his episodes on this show was, salesperson, marketer, you need to have some empathy. You have different roles, you have different skill sets, you have different metrics that you're held to oftentimes, but you need to show some empathy for the person in the other seat. So even if people take nothing else away from this episode, which I doubt they will only take this, but if they do just take away that point of empathy and understanding the other side, I think they've gotten a ton of value. So Dan, if anybody listening to this would like to stay connected with you, which I would highly recommend they do, or learn more about what you and the team at Harri are up to, what's the best way for them to do that, man?
Yeah, certainly. So harri.com, HARRI. Check us out there. If you want to connect with me, certainly on LinkedIn. I also have a blog and a website that's dan-murdoch.com. There's contact me through that. Or you can certainly just send me a message through LinkedIn. Happy to connect and discuss anything under the sun, marketing or sales related.
I love it. Dan, this has been such a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks again for joining us one more time, man.
No, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you, Logan.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.